Stable Diffusion XL training is incredibly powerful, and with the help of LoRa you can train anything you want. But how can you train a style using your own images? Well, today I'm gonna show you how. Hello humans, my name is Kohya GUI Overload and I am back with another bunch of images. Just make sure that they are of high resolution and then go ahead and save them on my computer. And here what I'm looking for is the most varied images possible. But we need a bunch of images that represent the style correctly. So don't select some weird artwork that does not represent the style well, because obviously if you do that, this is not gonna work. You really need to select the best, most clear images possible, and obviously try to choose as high resolution as possible. But don't worry, even if you don't manage to find a high resolution image, we're actually gonna solve that problem very quickly. And the minimum amount of images that you need for a good style training is around 20 images, which is basically double the amount of images for character training. However, this is really the bare minimum. This is only if you are really lazy, because in reality, in my own testing, a good number of images for style training should be above 40. And compared to character training, where more images is not necessarily better, for style training, however, this is the complete opposite, where I would usually say that more images with more variation will definitely make the model much better. So yeah, if you are planning on training a style, do not be lazy. Really select a bunch of images that really showcase the style well. Oh, and also here's a little trick. Instead of using Google, you can go on Steam, search for your video game, then select it, and then here on the homepage, not only you will have a bunch of different images of high resolution that if you want to save in your computer, you're gonna right click, click on inspect, just bring the inspect element tool and select the image, which will then give you the direct URL to the image. And if you click on this link, and now here you got a high resolution image of the video game that you want to train. And if you want even more images, you can just click on Community Hub and then click on Screenshot. And then here you will see a bunch of screenshots made by the community that are available for you to download, and that basically showcase perfectly the style of the video game that you want to train. So definitely use this trick if you want to train a style based on a video game. This is really the best way to do it. Okay, so now that we have downloaded our images, we can go to the next step, which is to make the images even better. Now in this example, I only downloaded 3 images just for the example, because although all of those images are of high resolution, if I click on one of those and I zoom in, you will see that this image is, well, it's kinda blurry. This is not gonna be enough for a good style training, because Stable Diffusion XL is really good at picking small details from the image. So if you leave all of those blurry images inside with those weird artifacts, when you're gonna do the style training, Stable Diffusion XL is gonna pick up on all of those little artifacts. So you want your images to be as sharp and crisp and high resolution as possible. So how exactly can we do that? Well, for this we actually have an amazing little tool. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called Stable Diffusion. Yeah, that's right. That's all you really need, because inside the Automatic 1111 Web UI, you have here an extra tab that allows you to process a bunch of images and upscale them to a higher resolution. So like for example, if I select one of the images that I have, like this one, then for the resize factor I'm gonna select 2. I want this image to be twice as big, and then for the upscaler, the one that I recommend you to use is ESRGAN for X+. This upscaler is really the one that you need. And now if I select it and then click on generate, lo and behold, what do we have here? A super sharp high quality image. Like this is the before and this is the after. This image is now much sharper with a lot more details, and that is of a higher resolution than the initial image. And that image is the one that we're gonna use for the LoRa training. And this is the process that you're gonna use for every single image inside of your folder. Now obviously, instead of doing one by one, you can simply use batch from directory, where you're basically gonna input the path of your images. Like for example, mine is right here, so I'm gonna copy the path, then put it right here, and then select an output directory. When I'm just gonna create a brand new folder, just call it big, and then use that folder path for the output directory. And then once everything is selected, you can just click on generate. And after a few seconds, we have now a high resolution version of our previous images, and they are now really sharp. And those are the images that we want to use for training. Now before before we proceed, here's my little advice for you. The first advice is actually to make sure that those images are not too big. And when I say big, not only I talk about the file size, but also the file resolution. Because if that resolution is a little too high, this might actually cause a problem and give you an error during training. And one little tool that you can use to compress the images and make them a little bit smaller is a website like Compressed PNG, where you can basically upload your images and it will automatically compress them to a smaller size. Like for example, here we have lost 65% of the size of the file, where we basically go from a file that is 3.45 megabytes to a file that is 1.19 megabytes, which is definitely much better. Okay, so now that we created our images and we made them sharper and crisper, we can start the next step in the training, which is the folder training creation. And for this, before we begin, here you're gonna click on the LORA tab, and then here if you click on configuration file, and if you are one of my Patreon supporters, you will have access to a bunch of training file presets that you can use to automatically use the best parameters for training. So basically here you're gonna click on open, choose one of the training presets. I recommend starting with the basic Stable Diffusion XL style, then click on open, and just like that, all the best parameters for training will be automatically entered. These are the most optimal training parameters for training a style, and you don't need to do anything. Everything is already done for you. The only thing that you need is to go into source folder and then select the Stable Diffusion XL model. So you're gonna click on this button right here and then look for where the model is located. So in my case, it is right here. And there you go. So now the only informations that we need to fill in are the locations of the training folder. And to create the training folder, you can either do it manually or you can do so automatically using the Dataset preparation tab. This is obviously the option that you should use. Now again, I'm not gonna go into details explaining what each section does. I already did that in my previous LORA video, but basically the instance prompt is the name of the style that you want to use inside the prompt. And if you want to train a character, you need to use a celebrity as a base. And this is what you should be doing. Your goal here is to search for a stable style to use as a base. Something that looks basically the same no matter what you generate. So here for example, I was pretty lucky, since here I was trying to train the Walking Dead video game style. When I inputted this inside the prompt, it gave me something like this, where you could clearly see that Stable Diffusion XL knew exactly what that style is supposed to be. And although again this is not perfect, it doesn't look exactly like the video game, the fact that this is a pretty stable style, which produces very similar images, well, this is actually enough for a base for training. And if you want to train a different style of the one that I showed you, you can either do some quick Google search and look up the name of a famous artist using a very similar style to the one that you want to train, and then generate a few images inside Stable Diffusion to check if Stable Diffusion XL knows who that artist is. And since Stable Diffusion XL was trained on a bunch of different artist styles, there is actually a very high chance that Stable Diffusion XL knows who that artist is. Now it could take some time depending on the style that you want to train, but this is really not that hard. Stable Diffusion XL has been trained on really a lot of different styles. It is really incredible. And if you don't want to do any of that work yourself, well, no worries, because I got you covered. Again, if you are one of my Patreon supporters, you will receive this huge Stable Diffusion XL style list that basically have 50 different artists in a bunch of different settings for you to search. And this is really all you need. You can just come here and use that style list to find a style that is close to what you want to train. It doesn't need to be perfect, it should just be enough to check if Stable Diffusion XL knows what that style is. So here for the Walking Dead video game, for the instance prompt, I was pretty lucky, so I can basically input something like the Walking Dead video game. Simple as that. Now for the class prompt, if you are training a style, the only thing that you really need to put is simply style, nothing else. So then here you're gonna select the folder where your training images are, so in my case it is right here, and then finally we come to the two last important part of the folder creation, the repeats and the regularization images. Now basically repeats is the amount of repetition that each image receives during training. So here if you input 40, each image will be hit 40 times. And if you remember correctly, for character training, for the repeats right here you input something like 20. Now I see a lot of people online tell you that for the repeats, for style training, you input a low number, such as like 5 or below, and that you only play with the epoch instead of repeats. However, in practice, I noticed that every single model model made with a higher repeats performed better than models with a lower repeats, which is why for the style training, I basically use the exact same as for character training, which is 20 repeats. However, I also saw some pretty good results with 10 and 15 repeats, which is pretty cool because that means that the training will be much shorter, while still keeping a pretty good quality. So if you want to have as fast training as possible, while still keeping a good quality for the style training, here for the repeats, you can input something like 10 and it will be perfectly fine. However, again, in my own testing, I saw that a higher repeats number, such as 20, usually produced way better results. So my advice for you, for the repeats, here just input 20. This is really a really good number. So then here finally we have regularization images. Now in my previous video, when it comes to character training, I advise you to use regularization images to make the model better and more stable, which is true. If I am training a character, I will use regularization images. In all of my testing, it always made the model much better, which is why again, if you are one of my Patreon supporters, you will have access to thousands of regularization images for you to use. But that is really only if you want to train a character, because however, if you want to train a style, regularization images becomes a little bit more optional. Now you see, the reason why it took me so many weeks to make this video is because style training compared to character training is way more subjective. Because if you're training a character, it is very easy to see which parameters is the best for training, because all you need to do is just take a look, see if the character looks better or worse. This is very easy to tell. However, if I show you something like this, I mean, which one is supposed to be the best here? It's really difficult to tell. And that is because style training is really different from character training. Because what's really gonna matter is your own personal choice, which makes style training extremely subjective. And because it is subjective, finding the best parameters for training is extremely difficult, which is why when I tried training with regularization images on and off, it was very hard to find the differences between a model without and a model with. I mean, which one of those models looks the best? It's really a question of personal choice. I mean, I suppose in this case I kinda prefer the model made with regularization images compared to without, but when you know that using regularization images multiply by 2 the time it takes for training, their usage for training becomes really optional. Now that being said, it's true that it makes the model a little bit more stable. Now one thing that I noticed, for example, is that when you train at a lower resolution or with a low learning rate, sometimes in the beginning you get like this weird hue. I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but you can see this weird pink hue or green hue in the beginning of the training. However, when you use regularization images, that hue is completely gone, which basically makes the model a little bit more flexible and a little bit more stable. However, at the same time, this hue is kinda gone the higher the learning rate and the more we train. And since you're not gonna use models at Epoch 1 or Epoch 2, this hue will already be gone by the time that you choose the right model. So again, technically, using regularization images for style training is very optional. I'm not gonna go as far as to say that it isn't useless, but it's not as useful as with character training. Or at least, the results that it gives you are subjective enough to not be taken into consideration. And they're only really useful if you're planning on merging a LoRa with an SDXL model. Because in that case, yes, using regularization images is definitely a good idea. So yeah, basically TLDR, if you're training a character, you can use regularization images and then put the folder path right here. But if you're training a style, especially with the parameters that I will show you later, it's definitely not as useful. So yeah, for style training, regularization images are definitely very optional. So for this training, I'm not gonna use them. Then finally, you're gonna choose the destination directory and then click prepare training data, which will then create this folder training with a log folder, a model folder, and an image folder, where all of your images will be inside. And then finally, do not forget to click copy info to folders tab, because now if you click on folders, you will see that every single field will be automatically populated, so that in the end the only thing that you need to put is the model output name. And then here for the model name, I highly recommend that you write what you're supposed to input in the prompt. So basically here just input the class prompt, which is gonna be something like The Walking Dead video game style. This way you know that this is what you need to input inside your prompt, so that you never forget. So now that we made our images better and sharper, I think that most of you who have watched my previous LoRa video know what is coming next, and that is image captioning. And oh my god, oh my lord, because this is by far the worst thing that you need to do for style training. Now, for those of you who don't remember what captioning is, it's basically creating a text file for each image that have the same name as the image, where you basically go to describe what the image looks like. And although for our character training, this caption can be very small and short, where you basically only describe what the character is wearing, maybe also the haircut and the background. For style training, however, you're gonna have to be a little bit more precise, because this step is absolutely crucial for the model to understand exactly what the image that you're trying to train. What is it that the image represents? And you need to input enough details for Stable Diffusion XL to understand what are the characteristics of that style. Now, as always, to help us in this endeavor, to help us in this horrible task, we're going to be using a tool inside the Koya SS GUI, because inside Koya, if you click on the utilities and then under captioning you click on bleep captioning, you have here a pretty cool tool that will help us caption our image. Now, I'm gonna tell it to you right now, this tool is only really useful to automatically create text files that have the same name as the image and add a prefix or a postfix, because everything else needs to be done manually. So here what you're gonna do is that you're gonna choose the folder where your images are located. So in my case, it is right here. Click select folder. You can leave everything else by default, but then here, compared to character training, where you would put the instance prompt in the prefix, like for example, you would put previously Margot Robbie, here for the style training, you would actually go and put it as a postfix, which will basically be added at the end of the caption. So here, if you remember, in our case, it was The Walking Dead video game style. But again, depending on the style that you want to train, you're gonna input that name right here. So it could be something like Picasso style, 8-bit style, etc, etc. And then once you input the postfix, you're gonna click on caption image. And then in a few seconds, it will create a text document for each image using the same name. And before, if you want, so that it doesn't stay like that, is to actually rename the files so that it looks a little bit better. And for this, I use a software called File Renamer Basic that is very easy to use. Just select your folder. Here you can just sort by extensions. So here you're gonna only select the PNG files. So you're gonna press Shift and then click on the last one, then right click, check only the files highlighted. Then here on the file name, you're gonna select custom file name. Then here input something like The Walking Dead video game style with maybe an underscore separator. And now if you click on preview, you should see that this is how the naming images will look like. And if you're happy with the changes, you could just click on apply. And now if you want the text images to correspond to those names, you're gonna basically do the same thing. You're only gonna select the text files with the txt extension, check only the files highlighted, then without changing anything, you're gonna click on preview, which basically will look like that, and then click apply. And now if you go back to your folder, you will see that every single image is renamed in a more, I would say, beautiful way, with every corresponding text files having the exact same name. And now that this is done, we can start the fun part. And yeah, this is sarcasm, because I can tell you that this is really the most annoying part of style training, because it takes just so long to do. And basically what you're gonna do is open the image on one side with the text document on the other, and you're gonna start to describe what the image looks like. You're gonna describe the characters, you're gonna describe what they're wearing, you're gonna describe the background, you're really gonna describe everything. So like for example, for this image, the caption should look something like this: a young girl wearing a cap with splats of blood on your face, standing next to a man with a steel bridge in the background, The Walking Dead video game style. And this is a very simplified caption, by the way. In reality, you should go in even more details, where you're gonna describe the haircut, the colors of their eyes, the colors of their clothes, etc, etc. Because the more details you input, the more precise the model is going to be. Now obviously there is no need to go overboard. You really don't need to describe literally every single detail on the image, but it still should be very precise. And then you're gonna save the file. And then you're gonna do it for every single image that you have. And if you have only 20 images, it's gonna be pretty fast. But if you have more images, that's really gonna take a while. Now I really wish that we had some sort of software that could do it automatically, but as of right now, the best tool is really human eyes. Now, speaking of automatic tool, here's actually a small software that I created that will allow you to automatically replace some words inside an entire folder. So like for example, let's say that you have here a bunch of captioning that you did, but at the end you realized that you should not use the Walking Dead video game style inside the captioning, and that maybe it should be something different. Let's say that it should be simply the Walking Dead style, or something different. Now you can either go inside every single document and delete that portion of the caption manually, or you can use My Text Replacer. And basically, if you launch this little software, this brings a little UI where you can select the folder path, select your folder, then here input the file extensions. So in my case it is .txt, so I'm gonna input .txt, but you can input multiple file extensions if you want, such as .html, .xml, .md, or .csv, and you can do that using commas. So if you have multiple files inside the folder that have different file extensions, you can input them right here. But in my case, this is only .txt, I'm gonna leave it like that. Then here for the search text, you're gonna input the text that you want to replace. So in my case, it is the Walking Dead video game style, so I'm gonna put it right here. And then for the replace text, this is the text that you want to replace, the text that you inputted right here. So if you remember, in our case it was simply the Walking Dead style. And now if I click on start, in less than a second, every single caption inside our text file has been replaced by the Walking Dead style. And all of that in less than a second. So instead of doing all of this manually, you can just use My Text Replacer. And if you saw that you did a mistake again, and you want to undo the text replacement, you can just click on this button right here, and it will undo the operation. As you can see right here, everything is back the way it was. So yeah, really cool piece of software, very practical, that is currently available for my Patreon supporters. Oh, and speaking of Patreon, not only you get all the previous Stable Diffusion XL LORA models training with the character training presets and regularization images, but in this video you will also get the Stable Diffusion XL style list that will allow you to find in a few seconds the perfect artist for your style. You will also get 5 different training style presets for local and RunPod training, the text replacer software that is extremely useful for captioning and everything else, and obviously for the best part, you will receive 5 exclusive style LORAs. The super cool Spider-Verse movie style, the Cyberpunk 2077 video game style, the Telltale's Walking Dead video game style that I showed previously, really super cool for creating zombies, and exclusive Hotline Miami 8-bit ugly pixart style, for those who knows, and finally the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure anime style. That is definitely one of my favorite anime of all time. And not only you get all of those models right now, but every week you can also suggest a new LORA file to receive directly on Patreon. So definitely vote in the poll right now, which is the next LORA that you want to get, and you will get a new one every single week. Oh, and also do not forget to copy and paste all the caption from our previous folder inside our training image folder. So inside image, the Walking Dead video game style, and you're gonna put them right here. Otherwise, this is not gonna work. So then finally, if you click on the parameters tab, as always, you will see a bunch of different parameters. But don't worry, as I said, there is only a few parameters that you need to take into account. And actually, if you are again one of my Patreon supporters, since we input the configuration file right here, you are technically completely done. You really don't need to do anything. You just need to scroll down and click on Start Training. But obviously, I will still explain a few parameters so that you understand what you need to change if you get issues. Alright, so the first thing is LORA type. Now there is actually a bunch of different LORA types that I tried that a lot of people say that is better for style training, like LoCON or LyCORIS or LoHA, but in reality in all of my testing, the standard LORA is really the best one. So really just do not care about any other types, just use the standard LORA type. So then here you have train batch size, which is basically the amount of images that are processed all at once. And the higher the number, the faster the training, but also the higher the VRAM that you're gonna use. However, if you are training a style, definitely input this number as high as possible. And that is because since you are gonna be using way more images for style training compared to character training, you really need to decrease the time training, because otherwise this is gonna take days. If you have like 100, 200, 300 images, which I gotta say is maybe a little too much, you definitely don't need this much for style training, but definitely if you can, input this value as high as possible. And in my testing, if you have like a 3090, you can input that batch size at 5. But obviously if you don't have enough VRAM, well in that case the only number that you can input is simply 1. So again, depending on your GPU, you should definitely try increasing that train batch size as high as possible. So then next we have Epoch. Now the good thing is, since we are not using regularization images, is that we basically have a training that is twice as fast, which is why we're gonna use that speed to increase the number of models that we create, which which is why for character training, if you remember correctly, I recommended an epoch of 10 and to save every n epochs, which will basically save 10 different models so that you can find which one is the best one. However, again, if you are training a style, you definitely need way more models to choose from, because again, depending on the style that you're training, sometimes you're gonna find the best model is at epoch 3 and sometimes the best model is at epoch 13. You really cannot tell, which is why having this higher number and by saving every n epochs, you ensure that you have enough models with enough variety for you to choose the best model from. So definitely put this at 15 epoch if you can. But obviously if you don't want to train as long and you really want to train as fast as possible, well, you can simply use epoch 10, but just know that you're maybe missing on the best model possible for your style. So definitely if you can, put this at 15 epochs. Here the caption extension, you're gonna leave it by default as always. For the mixed precision and safe precision, if you have an NVIDIA 3000 series or newer, you need to input BF16 for both, and if you have an older graphics card, you need to choose FP16 instead. But in my case, since I have a 3090, I'm gonna leave it at BF16. So then next, make sure that you have cache latent and cache latent to disk both checked. For the learning rate scheduler, you're gonna input it at constant with the add a factor optimizer, and do not forget to use these extra arguments. Again, I'm gonna leave them in the description down below for those of you who are not Patreon supporters, so you can just copy and paste them. And then finally, we come to maybe the biggest changes compared to character training, which is the learning rate. So again, the learning rate is how fast the model learns, and the higher the number, the faster it learns, but it also increases the risk of overtraining. And in my experience, when training a style, you need to use a learning rate that is definitely higher than when you're trying to train a character. And the best learning rates for training a style is between 0.009 and 0.0012. In all of my experimentation, in all of the models that I created, this is the best learning rate that I found to work the best. But if for some reason you're getting overtrained very quickly, then in that case try to decrease that learning rate to something like 0.009. But otherwise just keep it like that. So the next, for the max resolution, just keep it at 1024 by 1024. However, also know that 768 by 768 also works really good for style training, and it will also use much less VRAM and be faster to train. However, obviously it will not be as good as using 1024 by 1024. So definitely if you can, just leave it like that. So then here next, make sure that you have checked enable buckets. This is the option that allows us to train images the way they are without any cropping, which really gives the best possible results. So definitely enable this option, this is really important. And then here for the text encoder learning rate and the unit learning rate, input the same value as the learning rate right here. So if you have here 0.009, put the same for text encoder and the unit learning rate. So then here for the network rank and network alpha, if you remember correctly, for character training, I advised using something like 256 for the network rank and 1 for network alpha. However, for style training, I actually found that 128 for the network rank was actually the best parameter. Not only kept the same quality as 256, but it made a LoRa that is twice the size. So we go from a 1.7 gigabytes file to something that is 800 megabytes in size. So definitely a big improvement. Oh, and also obviously do not forget, if you have a GPU with a low VRAM, like 12 gigabytes of VRAM for example, you should definitely decrease that network rank to something like 32 or 24 instead. But obviously if you can, if your GPU is powerful enough, just keep it at 128. So then you're gonna scroll up, click on advanced, and then here you have gradient accumulation steps, which is basically in a way kind of like a simulation of batch size, where the higher the number, the faster the training will be. So if you actually want to have a training that is much faster without actually spending a lot of VRAM, you can increase that number to something like 4 or 5, and it will make the training much faster for almost no VRAM usage. But also keep in mind that sometimes it might make the model a little bit worse. So my advice to you, if you're not in a hurry, just leave this value at 1. So then here you're gonna leave pretty much everything by default. Make sure that you have checked gradient checkpointing, X-formers for the cross attention, and all the upscale bucket resolution. Now here you have also another option called noise offset, and apparently the default value for SDXL for noise offset is 0.0300 157. So what exactly does this noise offset do? Well, in practice, it should make the images a little bit more contrasted, meaning that the dark colors are a little bit darker and that the light colors are a little bit more lighter. And you can definitely use it if you want to, but in practice, however, it really doesn't really matter that much. Although you can see a big difference in the beginning of the training, as you can see right here, compared to one without the noise offset, in the end this really does not matter at all. And for some reason it also creates some weird artifacts on the image, so personally if I were you, I would probably not use noise offset. There is really no reason to do so. So basically my advice to you for noise offset, just leave this at 0 by default. This will really not impact the quality of the model at all. So then finally, once we are done and every parameters is entered correctly, we can scroll down and click on Start Training. And in my case, with those parameters, it takes around 21 GB of VRAM to do the training, with around 3 hours to complete. And once the training is finished, do not forget that the model should be saved in the models folder, that you can then use inside Stable Diffusion by putting them inside the models LORA folder. However, again, if you don't have enough VRAM to do the training, or you don't have a GPU at all, instead of using Koya locally, you can instead rent a GPU online on a website like RunPod, which for me is an absolutely lifesaver, and literally every single one of my training were done on this website for the last few weeks. And although I already showed you how to do that in my previous video, there has been a few changes in the template that I showed in my previous video. So basically if you want to train a LoRa with Koya on RunPod, you're gonna click the link in the description down below, create an account if you have it already, and then it will automatically select this Stable Diffusion Koya SS GUI Ultimate template, which is basically the template that we're gonna use to run Koya on the cloud as if this was a local installation. It is really super practical. So then here what you're gonna do is you're gonna scroll down, you're gonna choose a 24 GB VRAM GPU, like a A5000 for example, click on deploy, and then from here you're gonna click continue, and then click deploy. So now we're gonna go and click on my pods, and then wait for the pod to start. And there you go, after a few minutes our pod is ready. So what are the things that have changed in the template and why am I making this little update? Well, recently, around a week ago, the RunPod template has been changed and updated to feature the latest version of the Stable Diffusion Web UI 1.6. And this little update basically made it so it uses way more VRAM while being idle, meaning that it's just using some VRAM for absolutely no reason, as you can see right here. Meaning that each time that you wanted to train a model using Koya, you couldn't do it because you would run into a CUDA out of memory error. However, the template was updated to feature an application manager that basically allows you to stop and start any application that you are not using. So now if you click on connect and then click on port 8000, you are greeted with this RunPod application manager, where you basically have the automatic 1111, the Koya SS, and the Comfy UI that you can stop and start at any moment. And if you want to train a LoRa with Koya, what you need to do now is come here for the A1111 and click on stop, which will then says the automatic 1111 was stopped successfully. And then you can do the same with Comfy UI. Just click on stop and click on OK. And you will see that very quickly now no VRAM is being used by the application, meaning that now if you want to connect to the port 3010, you can train a LoRa inside Koya as if this was running on your local computer, and then click on the port 8888 to use a Jupyter notebook using this password right here, exactly as if this was a file explorer on your local computer. Now again, I'm not gonna go through the entire process. I already showed you how to do that in my previous video, where I basically show you how to do the entire training on RunPod using this template. So if you don't know how to do it, definitely watch this video first. I also have a bunch of configuration files for RunPod that are available for my Patreon supporters. Oh, and also a big thank you to Ashley Clients, the creator of the template, which is an absolute goat, because after I told him the issue about the template, he managed to fix it in only a few hours. So absolutely fantastic work. Thank you so much, Ashley, for this amazing template. This is absolutely fantastic. So really, thank you so much. And so basically, once the model is trained, now it is time to use the models and choose the best one. So for this, you're gonna go inside the folder that you created, then go to model, where you're gonna see all the LoRa models that were created during the training. So in our case, since this was 15 epochs, with a model saved at every epoch, we have 15 different models to choose from. So then now to use them, you're gonna select them, right click, then cut, then you're gonna go back to workspace, go inside Stable Diffusion Web UI, then models, LoRa, and then you're gonna right click and paste them same right here. So then you're gonna launch Stable Diffusion, so then you're gonna click on connect and then click on port 3000, which will launch the Stable Diffusion web UI. So now let's generate some images. So here I'm gonna input a fun prompt, such as a portrait of Nicolas Cage as an adventurer, fantasy, highly detailed, ancient city in the background, and then input our instance prompt with the class prompt. So in our case, if you remember correctly, this was The Walking Dead video game style. And then here, to be able to compare all of those models side by side as easy as possible, you're gonna come here, click on LoRa, then refresh the list, and now you're gonna click on every single one of them, one after the other. I'm gonna show you why later. So there you go, now you have like 15 different LoRas inside our prompt. So now what you're gonna do is that you're gonna select all of them, every single one of them, then Ctrl-C or copy, and now you're gonna delete every single one of them except the first one. So then you're gonna click on generation, then you're gonna scroll down, click on script, and choose XYZ plot. For the X type, you're gonna choose prompt S/R, and then for the X values, here you're gonna paste all the LoRa names that we copied previously. And now after every single LoRa, you're gonna input a comma. So a comma here, here. You're gonna do that for every single one of them, just like that. And basically, as I said in my previous video, what this will do is that it will take the first value in the X values, search it in the prompt, and then replace it by the next one. And then it's going to do it for every single values after the comma. So here I'm just gonna check include sub images, and then now I'm gonna click on generate. And after a few minutes, it will have generated 15 images with 15 different models. And now to be able to choose which one is the best one, you're gonna save that image to your computer, then go on a website like Miro, and then upload it right here. And now it's time for you to choose the best model possible. How do you do that? Well, it's very simple. It's up to you. Yeah, because as I said previously, compared to character training, where you could easily see which model is overtrained and follows the prompt correctly, style training is definitely extremely subjective, meaning that the model that you choose is really just gonna be your own personal opinion. Now, the only thing that you really need to keep in mind is that you will see that after a while, after a few epochs, you will see that some images will start to look a little bit worse than the other one. Almost like there are some artifacts appearing on the image that are making the images look way worse. That is basically a sign of overtraining, meaning that basically all of those images are overtrained and unusable. So you can basically delete all of that from your selection. And then you can concentrate on the previous images made by the previous models, and then choose which model do you actually prefer. And again, this is really just a question of personal opinion. Some people might prefer the model number 4, some people might prefer the model number 6, some the number 7, etc, which is why you need to generate a bunch more images and select which one do you actually prefer in the end. Now, one trick that you can also use is to use a character LoRa in combination with the LoRA style. So like for example, this is a LoRa with Billie Eilish, and you will see that very quickly, after Epoch 9, you start to see some very weird artifacts on the image. Now, although you can just decrease the weight of the character LoRa, instead of using a weight of 1, you can input something like 0.7. If you see that after a certain epoch, you start to get a lot of artifacts, that means that those models are a little too overtrained and will not work well when combined with character LoRas, meaning that you need to choose a LoRa made in a previous epoch. But I mean, once again, this is really just a question of preference. Like for example, which one do you prefer between all of those people? I mean, they kinda all look kind of good. Maybe some people might prefer this one, some people might prefer this one or this one. So this is really just a question of personal choice. And because we have 15 different models to choose from, we have really a great selection to choose the best model possible. I mean, it's better to have a lot of choices rather than very few. So yeah, basically go ahead, generate a bunch of images with all of those models, and then compare them side by side to choose the best one in the end. This is really the only way to do it correctly. And then once you're done, once you've chosen the model that you like, let's say that you want the model number 6 for example, to download it on your computer, you can just right click and then click on download, so that now you can then use it anywhere you want. So yeah, there you go, simple as that. Now you should know everything you need to train the best LoRa style with the best parameters possible. And again, do not forget that if you have any issues, if you are one of my Patreon supporters, course, you get priority support on either Patreon or on the private Discord channel. So if you have any issues, definitely send me a DM and I will try to answer as quickly as possible. So that being said, try out LORA Style Training if you can, and do not forget to have some fun. And there we have it, folks. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm. Thank you also so much to my YouTube and Patreon supporters for supporting my videos. You guys are literally the ones who are making these videos happen, so thank you so much, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.